Welcome to Doctors at Work. My name's Matt Daniel, and this podcast is part of my mission to help doctors create successful and meaningful careers. Today's topic is fellowships, and I'm having a discussion with Manuela Cresswell, and she tells me about the 2 fellowships that she has done. She shares her top tips on planning a fellowship, and it's important to start early and to make contact with fellowship directors and current fellows, to meet them and talk to them and ask open questions about the clinical opportunities, timetabling and trainer support. Now, every doctor is different and every fellowship is different. So the key for trainees is to know what they want, need and aim for, and then to align their fellowship training with their own personal objectives. Welcome, Manuela. Tell me a little bit about yourself.
Thank you for having me. I'm an ENT consultant in Plymouth in Southwest England. I've just started as a new consultant here. I'm originally from Colombia, but have been in the UK and did all my higher surgical training in the UK in Peninsula. And I have done 2 fellowships, which I think is probably why I'm qualified to be here in this fellowship talking about fellowships.
Yeah.
Podcast. Yeah.
Absolutely. And that's the topic for us today then really is fellowship. And I know for lots of people, wherever people are in the world, there comes a time at the end of one's training where you kind of think, okay, what kind of a practitioner do I want to be? What kind of a job do I want to get? What kind of practice do I want to have? So, whether you're a surgeon or whether you're a physician, there's always towards the end of the training that area, what do I want to specialize in and how do I actually do that? So I'm wondering, okay, so you've done 2 fellowships. I'm interested in whether you could talk me through how did you plan them?
How did I plan them? So I think when I was maybe within 3 years of finishing my training, I started to think, what do I want to do after I finish training? Do I want to go straight into a consultant job? Or do I want to do something else? And that's when I started to think, well, I do think I would like to do a fellowship. My particular fellowships are in otology, which are sort of a subspecialty within ENT. But what I was thinking is, do I want to go into a consultant job? And how am I going to feel when I start a consultant job? And how do I want to feel? And I think the main thing I wanted to feel was that I was able to deal with the more complex cases, and I was quite confident and competent in dealing with those complex cases. And I thought, if I don't do a fellowship, I don't think I will feel competent enough to do that as an otologist, especially because I wanted to work in a tertiary center, not in a district general hospital. So I started to think about where can I do that? And I mean, there's hundreds of fellowships all around the world. I thought about going abroad. I thought about staying in the UK and doing the fellowships here. And the decision came because my husband works in the UK and he wasn't keen to go abroad. And we got a young family, so we decided to stay in the UK. So then I started looking at all the fellowships in the UK, and I actually emailed all the potential fellowships about 2 or 3 years before. So all the consultants that were in charge of the fellowships, and I said, I'm interested, can I come for a visit? What is this like? And I started talking to people very early on to look at fellowships. Mm-hmm. And I think it started from then. And what happened after was basically, I think timing was everything. When I was ready to go on a fellowship, the applications opened for a specific fellowship, which is what I was looking into. And I applied and I got the job. So a lot of it wasn't necessarily that I said, I want that one and that's the one that is going to happen. But it's just almost like when the applications open and when I was ready to go for the fellowships.
Yeah. So the starting point there for you really was 2 or 3 years even before. So it's not that you're within 6 months of finishing and saying, okay, I'm going to apply for a fellowship. You started planning way, way, way earlier.
I think most fellowships these days are appointed well in advance, especially if you want to go abroad. But most of the fellowships, at least in ENT, are appointed probably 2 years ahead.
Yeah.
So yes, so I always thought I have to be ahead of the curve and I have to start contacting these centers before.
Yeah. But that also then means that at that time, having already made a career decision 3 years before you were ready to be a consultant, you've made a decision about vaguely what kind of a consultant and what kind of a practice you wanted to have. Yeah. Sort of. So again, it's not that one comes to the end of training and say, okay, I'm going to be finished in 6 months. I fancy being this kind of a consultant in this kind of a center. You already knew 2 or 3 years before finishing.
Yes, I guess so. So I knew I wanted to do otology, but I didn't know specifically what type of otologist
Yeah.
did I want to be. And I always felt like I wanted to go beyond the normal competence of an otologist. So I wanted to do something extra so that I felt really comfortable within the standard otology
Yeah.
work. And that's what took me to school-based
Yeah.
surgery. And when I applied for the school-based fellowship, I didn't know I would end up doing a school-based because I hadn't done any school-based during my training at all.
Yeah.
So I thought like, I'm just do it so that I become really confident in
Yeah.
dealing with all the complications of pathology. But then it happened that took me to then a job in school-based.
Yeah, yeah. It's interesting if I think for me, when I did my fellowship, I probably a bit like you, I thought I've got to be trained at a higher level than what I'm actually going to end up doing. Yeah. So, the kind of the similar thinking as you outlined, which is, okay, this is probably what I'm going to be doing, but I want to be capable of more than what I'm actually going to be doing because of that. That then makes you feel safe. You know that if you get stuck, you can bail yourself out because you've actually done the next level up stuff already. Yeah. Okay. And you said that then you contacted people that hosted. You made the decision you're going to stay in UK, and then you were looking. How did you find out which units have the fellowships? Who are the fellowship directors? Where was that information?
So I spoke to a lot of people that have been in fellowships, and the BSO, which is the British Society of Otology, has a database which is not necessarily that up to date, but they have a database of all the fellowships in the country. So I decided I would contact everyone, and I emailed them. I introduced myself, added my CV, added my logbook, and said, this is my timeline. I'm interested in a fellowship in otology, and I'm going to be ready for a fellowship in otology at this time. Do you have anything available? When are your applications? And I also ask a lot of questions then. I ask about what the timetable was like, what the main focus of the fellowship was. And I asked to be put in touch with the current fellows at the time so I could talk to them and find out more about what was really going on in that fellowship.
Yeah.
So I think that was really useful. And without that, I wouldn't have looked at some of the fellowships maybe because they weren't so well known.
Mhm. Mhm.
Yeah.
And how did these people react? Because presumably they must get lots and lots of people emailing them. Did they all reply? Sort of did they fob you off? Were they helpful?
I think the majority of them replied.
Yeah.
Some of them didn't want to visit. Some of them did want to visit, but it was COVID time, so I think the
Okay.
visits to fellowships were not working at the time. But with a lot of them, I arranged a phone call, just a 5-minute phone call, just to talk about it, especially in places where I've never
Mhm.
worked. And they replied and said, "Thank you for your interest. We are going to be opening the applications here." And the ones that actually I ended up doing, they contacted me when they opened the applications. So they said, "We're going to open them. Watch out for the application, for the advert." And then I applied for those.
Yeah. So that's useful then because clearly they must somewhere have a database of people that would vaguely be interested about this time. And then if they hadn't contacted you, then often it's difficult, particularly if you kind of think at international level, I don't know, if there was a fellowship advertised in France, how would you know? If
Then, yeah.
you wouldn't know. I mean, okay, in UK, you and I can probably know where the jobs would be advertised in UK, probably, but we wouldn't know where jobs are advertised in Australia, New Zealand, Europe, would we?
And one of the things that is interesting is that fellowships are not always advertised as a fellow. they sometimes advertise as a trust grade job here in the UK because HR is a little bit maybe not connected with the differences between a trust grade job and a fellowship, which is still a trust grade job, but it's a completely different thing.
Yeah.
So yeah, so unless you know what you're looking for,
Yeah.
you won't see it
Yeah.
and you miss the application.
Do you know, I wonder if a lot of people would feel embarrassed to send these emails. You know, people wouldn't be good at networking. They're going to say, "What am I going to ask?" You know, if I'm going to go there and say, you know, let's say I'm going to go and spend a day in their unit, what am I going to talk about? So, you know, that kind of the networking side of that. I mean, how did you handle that?
Um, I just thought I'm gonna go and have a chat with the people and see what the people are like and whether they are people that I want to learn from. So I try to ask open questions about what's the experience here, what do you expect from a fellow, what would be what would a good fellow look like.
Uh-huh.
So that was almost ammunition that I could use for the interview,
Yeah.
but also I think their answers really told me a lot about their engagement with the fellowships. What you want from a fellowship is trainers that are engaged and willing to teach you and take you to the next level, not just to have someone else fill in a rota gap, but people that are interested in really training you to consultant level and
Yeah.
beyond.
Yeah.
And I think just having a feel for the place, what the trainees were like, and talking to everyone. And I would ask a lot about the case mix, how many of these cases they would do, and particularly in areas that I wanted to develop. So, for example, I wanted to do more endoscopic ear surgery. So I ask a lot about, do you do this type of surgery here? How many do you do a year?
Yeah.
That type of thing. But yes, I didn't. It felt a little bit like an interview because you're going
Yeah.
to a
Yeah.
clinical area, but I felt like I was interviewing them because I wanted to know, is this a place where I want to work? If I'm going to move my family across the country, if I'm going to put a lot of effort into this, I need to be happy with them as well as they be happy with to contract me and to have me for a year.
Yeah, yeah. Tell me a bit more about what makes a good fellowship, because you know you talked a little bit about what the trainer's like. You've talked a bit about that it has to meet your needs. You know, you have an agenda, and every doctor's got different agendas, don't they? So there's different fellowships for different people. But what other kind of things go into making a fellowship good?
So I have thought about this, thinking not just about me, but what other people might want to look in a fellowship. So you can look for maybe expanding your areas of expertise. You can look at whether you want to develop, for example, some academic networks. So if you want to do any particular type of research and work with someone who is an expert in that type of research, that would be the same, but not just in the clinical side, but in the research side. And also, I think if you think about going somewhere, like if you're going to a new system, a new healthcare system, you not only experience the new culture, but the new healthcare systems, how things are done elsewhere. I think that's really valuable experience, not just the clinical side of things, but how the whole system works. And I really wanted to go to New Zealand, actually, when I first started looking at fellowships, just because I thought I want to go somewhere completely different. Um, and try something completely different. But that didn't happen. But that was one of the things that I thought was attractive to doing a fellowship abroad.
Mm-hmm.
And in terms of what do I think makes a good fellowship, I think the timetable is really important and what you get out of a timetable. Um, because especially for me, I thought I want to get the maximum amount of surgical experience I can. And the timetables in the two fellowships were very different. In one, I got a lot of operating, and in the other one, I didn't get quite as much operating. Not to say the one was bad and one was good, but I think it definitely made a big difference to my confidence and my competence being in theatre every day, doing a lot of operating day and day and day in and day out. And I think that practice on a repetitive basis is what makes you good at something.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So I would definitely look at the timetable, the trainers, and also the variability in the trainers. That you're not only relying on one person, because if that person is off sick, then the fellowship is over. But I had, for example, in one of my fellowships, 5 mentors that I could go to the list at any time. I could go to the clinics at any time. And there's a lot of different techniques to learn from, different attitudes and strategies on how to cope with cases. So it was really a really good experience.
I hope you're enjoying the show. Please click subscribe so you'll be notified when new episodes become available. This podcast is part of my mission to help doctors create successful and meaningful careers. You can be part of that mission too by forwarding this show to one person who you think might benefit from listening. Thank you. Now on with the show. Yeah, sort of that single person, that strikes me as really important, because, you know, if your entire fellowship is based on one person being there, and that's the one person you want to work with, and then, you know, that, I mean, it's not unheard of somebody to be off for 6 months, isn't it? You know, let's say they're having a shoulder operation and, you know, they can't operate for 3 months or whatever. That's a quarter of a year gone, isn't it? So yeah, so that's really important. How you talked about making academic connections, research papers, you know, getting yourself known. How important is prestige when choosing a fellowship?
It's an interesting question. I think there's 2 sides to it. On the one side, I think maybe tertiary academic centers will view a more renowned fellowship as a necessarily better fellowship. But I think on the other side, from what I heard from other colleagues, is that some of those renowned fellowships, actually, they're not necessarily the one where you get the most experience in terms of surgical experience and clinical experience, because often the trainers are very busy, they have a private practice, they have other things going on. So I felt like I wanted to maximize my surgical experience, and that was my focus. But some other people might want to maximize the research experience. So I think for me, I did 2 fellowships that were, I guess, less well known nationally, and they worked really well for me. And I got a really good mentorship from everyone that I had that trained me, because they had the time for me. So interesting. I think working in different places also allowed me to have loads of opportunities. So opportunities I never thought of, like writing a book chapter and being a faculty in a temporal bone course. And now I become part of the regular faculty in that temporal bone course. So all of those things are added bonuses that I never thought that I would have.
Yeah.
That means I have networks all over the country. I'm not, because the Southwest, especially where I worked, is quite an isolated area.
Yeah.
So it has been a really good thing for me.
Yeah. And it sounds like asking questions, what's the case mix, what's the current fellow doing, what does the current fellow say, what's the timetable like, that in many ways sounds much more important than how prestigious sort of a unit or the department might be, because if you're going there for the prestige, then that's fine. But if you're going there because of whether it's your operative skills or whatever else, the 2 things don't necessarily follow. And one of the things that kind of amuses me in that sense, if I think of my department, is completely coincidentally we discovered we do twice as much of something quite complex as some huge prestigious centers, but actually we have twice the workload. so it's that kind of irony that if one thinks of in fellowships is actually what particularly in a craft specialty, how many patients, how many of these are you going to get to do, and if you're talking about, doing endoscopic ear surgery, is it one a month or is it one a day? And that sort of the two experiences will be very different, irrespective of whether sort of the person doing one a month, lectures all the time on it. They might be lecturing all the time on it, but they still only do one a month with you as a fellow. So yeah, so that kind of asking some questions that align your agenda and your wishes with what the fellowship offers, that sounds really important as well.
Yeah, I think another thing that was useful is to know how well trained your trainers are. So have they done a fellowship? Because I felt like some of the trainers I had been to fellowships all over the world. So I felt like I was learning from those people, even though I've never
Yeah,
actually
yeah,
worked with them.
yeah,
They are passing on the knowledge. So, and I particularly had a trainer who had done 2 fellowships and a PhD. And I mean, I felt like I was learning so many tips from all over the world because I had trainers that had been very well trained.
yeah, yeah.
That made a big difference.
Yeah. And again, the benefit of then having multiple trainers rather than just the one. Yeah, if the one person, if something happens to them, it's a disaster. But also, if you have 5 trainers and then each of those 5 has trained somewhere else, then actually, you're getting this effect of, each one of those 5 learned from 5, and each of those 5 learned from 5, and it's much greater than just the one person and working with the one person. So yeah.
Yeah, I think that has resulted in me being very, in my abilities as a surgeon to be very flexible, rather than just have one way of doing the same thing, because I've seen so many different ways of doing it. I think, oh, okay, well, we can do it this way or that way, and what would be best for this particular case, and that really fills me with confidence when it comes to a consultant job day one.
Yeah.
I feel like I can provide so many offers to the same patient.
Um,
And I think coming from a place where I had a little bit of an imposter syndrome, I felt like, am I ever going to be good enough? What do I need to do to be good enough? And that with 2 fellowships, I felt like I'm never going to be better trained than this. So I do feel like that imposter syndrome has quieted
yeah, yeah, yeah,
since doing that.
yeah. Can you tell me a bit more about the advantages of doing a fellowship in your home country versus going abroad?
So I would say I think, and I asked my husband in preparation for this for this podcast what he thought about the fellowships to see
Uh-huh.
from his experience what it's like,
Yeah.
and he says it's extremely disruptive and it's extremely expensive, but it gave you more confidence.
Okay.
So, so even within the UK, it really had a huge upheaval to our lives. We had to rent our house, move thousands of miles away. It was very expensive. It was very disruptive. My child had to move nurseries multiple times. So even within the UK, it cost a lot of money and it was very disruptive. So I think that's given with both, unless you're doing a local fellowship. I think the advantage of staying in the UK is that you can hit the ground running when you get to a different NHS system. It's still the NHS, you know how it works. For me, it felt like, okay, there are slightly different systems, but I know how it works and I could sort of get on with the work quite quickly. While going to a new system can be a bit of a shock, which I remember when I first started in the NHS, having done medical school in Colombia, it was a huge shock adapting to the NHS. So I imagine that going abroad would bring that same level of everything is new. I don't know how anything is done. I don't know the culture. I don't know the systems. I don't know the processes. But with that, it comes the amazing opportunity to travel in a new country, to see different ways of doing it. So yeah, I don't think there's a right or wrong answer. And I think if I could have it my way, I would have done one abroad, one here.
Okay. Best of both worlds.
Mm.
How did you actually manage to secure the fellowships? Because fellowships are very competitive, aren't they? Yeah. So you managed to succeed in that process twice. Yeah. So what helped you actually get those jobs?
What helped me? I don't really know. I think the fact that I was very proactive
Yeah.
and showing that I was very keen, my CV was definitely tailored towards otology. And I think for both of them, it's really important that I had a job in mind that where I would be using the skills
Yeah.
that I would be learning in the fellowship so that the trainers felt like I'm going to teach this person something that they are going to be using.
Yeah.
And I think especially when it came to apply for the second fellowship, they said, well, why do you need another fellowship? I was like, why not? I want to do this.
Yeah.
And actually, I got a job starting in a year. So I got a year
Yeah.
now to better myself as much as I can. And they thought it's really a really positive attitude that I wanted to improve. And I think from their point of view, it meant that I came at maybe a higher level than other fellows would
Yeah.
have started. And in that fellowship, it's amazing because one of my trainers used to always leave the theater at the trickiest time of the operation. He would say, I just need to go and have a coffee. I'll come back in a minute. And I would look back and he would say, you just call me if you need me. But he would do it on purpose to try and push me to
Yeah.
that point
Yeah.
where I'm actually completely confident. And I don't think he probably would have done that with everyone, but that's what came from really developing those skills more and more and more.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And I like then that idea that what helped you get the jobs was a very clear pathway, yeah. Not doing a fellowship in skull base and ended up doing tonsillectomies in a DGH. So nothing wrong with that, but that wasn't your pathway, yeah. So that the fellowship people could see we're going to train you in these skills, and this is how you're going to apply these skills in the job that you have or the job that you're aiming for, and that kind of personal story of where you've come from, where you're going, what the purpose of this training is. That kind of sounds like a really, really important thing. Yeah.
Mhm.
When you get the job as a fellow, what does one need to do as a fellow to get the most out of a fellowship?
Um, I would say just be very proactive from the beginning, have a good communication with your trainer about the expectations, what is your role as a fellow, and what are the simple things you need to be doing to make sure that the role goes well. So like seeing the patients, when do you see them, make sure you are sort of in all the right places at the right times. And the other thing was just to be very honest and open about your current skills and how you want to improve those skills. So not to try and say, oh, I can do all of this on my own, because realistically, that's not how you develop your skills. So I would be very honest and open and say, these are the areas I'm good at, or I think I'm good at,
Yeah,
but please tell me if I'm not. And these are the areas that I don't think I'm so good at. Can you help me with that? And ask questions. How do you think I can make this better?
yeah,
And just have a constant conversation about how they feel like that if you are progressing and what are the things that you need to be doing.
yeah,
And I also ask a lot about reading materials. What do you use? What do you revise on this subject? So that I was thinking the same as they were thinking,
yeah.
which was quite useful.
Yeah. How's the relationship between the senior doctor and the fellow different compared to the senior doctor and a standard registrar trainee? I mean, is the relationship the same, or do you have a different relationship with consultants when you're a fellow?
I definitely think there was a slight difference in how I was treated. Um, it was much more of a peer-to-peer
Okay.
mentor type relationship. Um, and the expectation was that I was there to learn and do most of the cases rather than only the easy cases. And the expectation was also that I was there to train the registrars,
Okay.
which was a really good thing to do during my fellowship, because otherwise you just get to a consultant job and you just get thrown in the deep end and you have to train people and you don't know how to train people.
Yeah.
But yeah, I felt like I was treated very differently. And certainly in the last fellowship, I was treated as a colleague, and they really respected my opinion, and they asked me for my opinion, and they let me make the decisions myself, which was really useful to make me feel like I'm not always having to ask the boss what's next. I think myself, okay, what would I do in this situation? And if I have doubts, then I ask again. So it's a really validating process to
Yeah.
do.
Yeah. I wonder if I could bring us to a close, and maybe could I get you to summarize and tell me what would be your top tips for doctors at work who are thinking about fellowships?
So I think it would come back to the question of where do you want to be and who do you want to be in a few years? And what are the areas that you feel that you need to be better at
Mhm.
to be a good consultant? I wanted to be a confident, a calm consultant that would be good at training others. And that's why I looked for the fellowships I applied for and I did. So it would be more of a what is it that you want to do rather than what worked for me works for you, because it is not. And I don't think most people need to do two fellowships. I think some people are absolutely fine without doing a fellowship, going straight into a consultant job. I certainly don't think I was prepared well enough to go into the job I have now without the fellowships.
Yeah. Wonderful. Thank you very much.
Thank you.